Good evening to everyone who has joined and everyone who will be watching this as a recording. I'm Don Kinzler, the NDSU Extension Horticulture Agent for Cass County. And in this Zoom webinar format, if this is new to you, everyone's camera and microphone is automatically off. If you have any questions, we'll discuss those at the end of the webinar, and you can type them into either the chat or the Q&A box as we go along. Thank you. Now, it's interesting to talk about lawns in our webinar this evening. It's fascinating because we've had a long history of kind of an interest in lawns. And so one interesting question is, when did this whole lawn thing start? So, when a person does a little searching in history, as to when were the first lawns kind of developed. And it actually goes all the way back to medieval times with castles. Now, the people that built the castles did not want invaders being able to creep through the underbrush and attack the castle. And so a closely cropped lawn area or vegetation area around the castle became the way to go. And oftentimes, of course, they would graze livestock out around to keep the underbrush low. And so that's kind of the first recorded of how it became. And of course, then that look carried over into the European estates. It became a symbol of status. If you had a beautiful lawn, well manicured around your estate, and that same concept came across into the United States also. Then a well-manicured lawn became a status symbol. And of course, a beautiful home didn't hurt either. But it wasn't until a little bit later that it became common for all of us to have a lawn. At the White House, around the time of the First World War, they actually used sheep to graze the lawn of the White House. But when the lawnmower was invented, it actually was invented in the late 1800s, and then in the early 1900s became a thing that many homeowners could own and enjoy. So the revolution really began with the invention of the lawnmower. There were even some early motorized versions. But then the birth of the American suburbs, really after World War II, the all-American lawn. I can almost hear the clickety-click of that gentleman's lawnmower as he kind of goes along his lawn. And so it was then after World War II that really the American lawn kind of became part of our homes, kind of the Leave It to Beaver era. And a person can just picture those well kind of manicured lawns. So that takes us to today's lawn. And now there are advantages to a grass type of lawn. For example, they produce oxygen. Anytime an area of soil is covered with plants, that's usually a good thing. And so for an area of soil to be covered with lawn grass, there are benefits. The production of oxygen is very important. For example, it's interesting. Scientists that have tested this have shown that an area of lawn about 5 foot wide by 5 foot long uh, produces enough oxygen to support one adult per day. And so they do give us good things. They reduce the runoff into our lakes and streams. They kind of catch and hold different things and tie them up instead of running down the drains. The lawn grass does improve the soil. As a person mows it, that turns into kind of a composty type material. And so it does improve the soil. The roots going down in kind of loosen the soil, add organic matter. Lawns reduce noise versus, for example, a hard surface. Lawns do absorb that noise. It creates a cooling effect around a home. And of course, it's very walkable and playable. We're going to talk a certain at a certain point in our webinar, we're going to talk about lawn grass alternatives, other things that we can use. But lawn grass, of course, is very playable. We can play kickball and croquet and things on the lawn, where some of the other lawn alternatives, it's more difficult to do that. So there are good benefits to lawns. They aren't a total energy sink. It doesn't mean that they just take resources without giving back. So they're good. There are good reasons why lawn grass is healthy, but there are alternatives to it. Now, I like to think of a lawn as kind of the canvas on which the landscape is featured. For example, here, the nice shrubbery and flowers and different things, the lawn grass just kind of sets that off. So I like to think of that as kind of a feature on which the good stuff is shown off. For example, here in this beautiful yard, isn't that nice? The lawn just kind of is secondary, but look at the beautiful landscape that is kind of produced off of that lawn. The nice thing about lawns also, they can be whatever maintenance you choose. They don't have to be high maintenance. For example, if you look closely at the lawn there, there's a few spots that look a little bit thin. It doesn't look probably like it's highly fertilized, but yet it's pleasant. And so a lawn can really be whatever maintenance that we choose to give it. So now for throughout the webinar here, we're going to talk about some of the ways that we can get our lawns going and ways that we can kind of add less resources to them. And in the meantime, we're saving ourselves some time. So if we talk about seeding a lawn, brand new area, or maybe we've got kind of a dead spot that needs to be reseeded. So let's talk about that. Lawns are relatively easy to get going. Now, the grass seed is very, very important because a lawn can be there for 100 years or more. So we need to plant the good stuff. So when looking for lawn seed mixes, and usually they are a mixture, when studying the label, look for about 50% Kentucky bluegrass cultivars. Now, there will usually be different named types of Kentucky bluegrass on that label, but just add those up and they should be about 50%. For example, there might be Glade Kentucky bluegrass, Park Kentucky bluegrass. There's even a cultivar Fargo Kentucky bluegrass. And then also, because most lawns have at least some shade in them, whether it's the shade of the house or shade of some trees, it's a good idea to have about 50% of fescue. Fescues tolerate shade quite well, and so that blend of the two of those together makes a good grass seed mix. You do get what you pay for. When you're studying grass packages at the garden center or the national chain store, you'll see a wide variety of prices. The cheaper blends usually have the cheaper cultivars that aren't as nice. They may not be as disease resistant, but also they may have higher percentages of just annual grasses that'll grow well for one season and then die. And so this is really the time to invest in a good, high quality grass seed, even if it's going to cost more. So this is one case where I'd almost look for one of the higher priced grasses and go with that. Again, a few dollars saved isn't going to pay when the lawn is going to be with us for the next 100 years. So the time to seed, early May. Now, Kentucky bluegrass does not start to germinate in the soil until the soil temperature reaches around 50 to 55 degrees. So there's really no sense to seed too early because those birds will just kind of enjoy it. And so we may as well wait until around the first part of May until that soil warms up. Then the grass seed will sprout quicker and become established much better. So early May is a good time to seed. The other time that works really, really well is in September. If we seed before the 15th of September, so late August, early September, that is really an excellent time. At that time of year, the soil has warmed up from the whole summertime and grass seed sprouts very, very nicely. Grass seed can be seeded with either of the kind of combination spreaders that you see that work well for both fertilizer and grass seed. And with those, there are usually certain settings for grass seed. So hopefully we've saved the instruction manual for the spreader, so it tells what setting to set that on for grass seed. Or you can usually look that up online as well for what setting to put on that. Because the grass seed label will indicate how much to apply over a certain area. So I thought I'd show you just a couple of kind of before and afters with our own yard. About 8 years ago, we moved our home to a new lot and so kind of started from scratch. And so what I did, because I didn't have a sprinkler system to keep it all wet at the same time, I did it in batches. So we did a combination of starting some landscaping, starting some flower beds, and then seeded areas that I could keep moist. And the single most important determining factor for success in getting grass seed to sprout is uniform moisture, keeping the surface of the soil uniformly dark moist until that grass seed is well visible, sprouts, nice green sprouts. And that can be a challenge. And so since we didn't have a sprinkler system, we just drug hoses around, but I only wanted to start it in chunks that I could do. Again, we used the little combination spreader that you see in the picture there. If you see in the foreground, there's an area of grass that I started earlier. And so they got that up and growing, then started another batch. And then pretty soon that area in front of the house got growing quite nicely. And then started another patch off to the side. Now in this photo, way off to the left-hand side, you'll see an area that already got established well. Then I'm working on the area beside it to get that established where I could keep it nice and moist. And then there the grass developed. And of course, patience, it takes a little while to get grass seed established. But again, keeping it uniformly dark moist is the single most important. If on for example, a windy day, you may need to water that in both morning and late afternoon. It can be a challenge. That's where mulches can greatly help. In some areas, we use straw. But you have to keep that moist or that'll all blow around too. There are packaged mulches that you can buy, kind of green type mulch that you can spread over the seed, and that helps greatly too. You can even use grass clippings from the part that's already established. Dried grass clippings spread over will help too. All right, so those were just a little bit of our own journey in reseeding. So now some tips for the healthiest lawn. All right, the best mowing height is 3 inches at least, maybe even a hair higher. Now, if you keep your blades nice and sharp, that lawn is going to look nicely trimmed and nice and uniform. That mowing height at 3 inches is a very simple thing that a person can do to keep the lawn healthy. What it does is it helps shade the roots. So the roots are going to stay cooler and more moist, preserves moisture, so you aren't going to have to water quite as much. It also helps to outcompete the weeds that would try to get going down in that. And so good reasons to set the mowing height to 3 inches. It's important to keep the blades sharpened. Because one reason is when you're looking at the lawn from a little distance, if the little grass blade ends are ragged, you're going to kind of notice more of a grayish brownish look to the lawn. But if the blades are sharp and a nice crisp cut will make the lawn look nicer. Also, there's less water loss through the grass blades if that's a nice clean cut versus a jagged cut loses moisture out of that grass blade more easily. Now, a common question with keeping it at that 3.5 inch mowing height is, does that mean you have to mow more often? And no, there's actually been research done on that, that if you mow lower, you're actually mowing more often because, when it grows a little bit, then to you it looks like it's too long, so then you mow it again. So actually, a lower mowing seems to encourage people to want to mow more often even than at the 3 inch. Another fascinating thing about keeping the mowing height a little taller is when they've dug up grass plants the taller the grass blade, the grass plant, the taller the green part, the deeper the roots have been able to go. And of course, that kind of makes sense because the more grass blade you have, it does more photosynthesis, and that produces a good deep root. And those good deep roots can help uh, pump moisture up out of the soil. And so you have to water less. Now, of course, there's kind of a uh, there's a point at which you don't want to let it get unclipped like that because it would just look shaggy and that would kind of not be healthy for the lawn. So 3.5 inches is a good kind of a compromise to the totally non-mowed type of lawn. But it's interesting. If you mow low, it results in shallower roots. So it's fascinating that way. So good reason to mow a little bit higher. It is better not to bag the grass clippings because there's some benefits to those grass clippings. Now, research has shown that if you return those grass clippings down into the lawn, so they filter down in, as they decompose, they release the equivalent of about one fertilizing over the course of that growing season. So they're adding fertilizer. And as they decompose, they release their nutrients, but also it kind of creates a mulch that helps conserve moisture, and it also helps to block out weeds. Now, if the grass has kind of gotten away from us a little bit, and if the clippings lay on the surface, kind of like a hay field, it is important to get those off. Otherwise, they would impede the light from getting down into the grass and kind of smother it out. So there are good reasons to just return the clippings, and that saves us time. We don't have to haul those clippings to the compost collection site. You know, now I have heard from some gardeners where they kind of like to bag the clippings because then they'll use that for compost, and that's a good reason too. Um, and of course, those clippings can be bagged and used as mulch on a vegetable garden or flower gardens. One thing that's important, though, if you do intend to use those clippings in compost or on the vegetable garden, make sure they have not been treated with herbicide because those weed killer chemicals could transmit then into your vegetable garden and cause great problems there. So anytime a lawn has been treated with weed killers, they should be mowed at least 3 times and those clippings not be used and disposed of. But if it's been treated with herbicide, you can return those down in to the grass itself because those herbicides, of course, were safe for lawns. All right. Now, on to watering. The best watering method is to water less often and water deeper. The recommended is about 1 inch per week in one application. So if Mother Nature gave us an inch of rain every week, we really wouldn't have to water our lawns. That would be enough. And that 1 inch in one application soaks down into the root system, penetrates down deep, and it encourages a deep root system. Now, this is opposed to watering with lesser amount and watering more often. You see, grass roots are smart. They're not going to go deep if all the moisture is up near the surface. If they're kind of if they're kind of addicted to a very frequent light sprinkling, the grass roots are all going to stay up near the surface. And so they'll never go deeply down in. Now, if the soil is light and sandy, then maybe a person does need to split that into 2 waterings, 1/2 inch twice a week. Now, how do you know with any given sprinkler, how do you know when you've gotten an inch of water onto your lawn? And of course, uh, unlike this photo that looks like they're watering in the sun, the most advantageous time to apply water to a lawn is in early morning. Of course, during the day, it's going to evaporate quicker and without soaking in. And so the best time is early morning. Um, Nighttime a nighttime watering that would cause the grass to stay wet for an extended period can can open the way for more lawn diseases. Sometimes you don't have much choice as to when you water your lawn, but if you have the ability, watering early morning is the best. Early morning, 5 o'clock or so, 6 o'clock would probably be better than in early evening when it would stay dark and wet all night. So back to the question, how do you know when you've gotten an inch on your lawn? Well, one good way is just to use a straight-sided can like a tuna can or a soup can. And if that's placed out on the lawn under the sprinkler pattern, maybe use a couple even, and a tuna can is approximately 1 inch deep. And so you leave that in the area under the sprinkler until you've caught that 1 inch. Um, Everybody's sprinkler is different. Everybody's sprinkler system, the water sprinkler that you use, my wife Mary and I just drag hoses to water the lawn. And so everybody's sprinkler differs. So you can't really say, I need to water it for an hour or so. But this is a good way to catch that water in a straight-sided can. Now, if we water more often than that, more often than once a week or twice a week on sandy soil, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to kill the lawn, but it's better for the lawn to water less often and water deeper, which encourages a deep root system. Some of the lawns that are watered more often than that can tend to be a little more prone to disease. And so there are some reasons. It doesn't necessarily mean the lawn is going to die if it gets watered more than that. But again, we're kind of looking at trying to economize water and keep the lawn the healthiest that we can with limited inputs. All right, next we go on to fertilizing the lawn. Lawns do like a lot of nutrients to produce all that green growth. Now, lawns will grow even if you don't fertilize them, especially if you're uh, not bagging the clippings. If you're letting the clippings fall, that provides some natural fertilizer also. I know out at the farm, never fertilized the lawn, and it did fine. But lawns are hungry for nutrients, and at least once a year, giving them some extra fertilizer, nitrogen, whether it's an organic type or a synthetic fertilizer, does help stimulate nice root growth, helps them to fill out and become thicker. We really do only need to fertilize once a year. We can do it more often if we want. We'll talk a little bit about timing in just a minute. So now if we look at lawn fertilizer, the major component of them is the first number on that fertilizer bag. And that first number is nitrogen, which is the element that lawns require the most of. Common question is, what about weed and feeds? Are they kind of beneficial? Do they work? Well, weed and feed combines both a fertilizer and a weed killer. A problem with that is if we blanket our lawn with that product, with herbicide, a lot of that herbicide is wasted. When we read the instructions on that weed and feed, it indicates that the weeds should be moist, damp, because the granules have to stick to the weeds in order for that herbicide to kill that weed. These products generally are not preventatives. Most of these products are contact herbicides. So because most of our lawns aren't a solid carpet of weeds, we don't need to carpet the entire lawn with a weed killing product. So we can save some money here by just applying the fertilizer, and we'll deal with spot weeds later. So do you see my point where because these products are not weed preventers, they are meant to kill weeds that are already there. And so by applying them over the entire lawn, we are putting weed killing product, where it really isn't needed over the entire lawn. Okay, now on to the when-tos of fertilize. The best times, easy to remember, it's the summer holidays of Memorial Day and Labor Day. If a lawn is being irrigated, a person can add around the 4th of July, but a lot of our lawns, if they're not irrigated, then twice a year is wonderful, around Memorial Day or Labor Day. You know, recommendations used to be for fertilizing lawns in the spring, fertilizing it early, late April, first part of May. The idea was to get it to green up earlier. But the research showed that a lot of that fertilizer was not ready to be used by the grass, that it was more effective if the grass was already up and vigorously growing, and then it could use that nutrition. Otherwise, in some of the spring rains, a lot of that fertilizer could be just washed off and down the drain before the grass plants had a chance to use it. So the current recommendation for healthy turf, when they've studied these things, was to wait until around Memorial Day. At that point, the grass is already green and growing, and the grass then is able to utilize the fertilizer that we apply. Now here's the very interesting thing, I think, is the other time of year, important time, is around Labor Day in September. And research showed that if you were going to put on one fertilizer application a year, the fall fertilizing in September is actually more beneficial and important to the grass than is the spring. Now, why would that be? In the fall of the year in September, grass is smart. It knows that the day length is getting shorter and it starts to prepare for winter. And it prepares for winter by kind of spreading outward, developing good deep roots that are going to see it through the winter. And if we give it nutrition, it's going to do extra of that. It'll develop good deep root system because we're feeding it, and also it'll fill in sideways to fill in a lot of the gaps. So around Labor Day is really, really important on that. Okay, let's take a look at weed control. We discussed the disadvantages of the weed and feed type weed control. And because many of our lawns are not a solid carpet, we can just spot spray. Just spot spray where there are weeds, because these products generally, as I mentioned, are not weed preventers. They are contact weed killers. And so we can just target. It doesn't take that long just to target with a little spray bottle, or I use a 2-gallon pump sprayer, and I just walk along and selectively give the weeds a little squirt, and then we aren't blanketing our whole lawn with those products if we only have a weed here and a weed there. And even the area there that looks like it has a fair amount of dandelions, it wouldn't take that long to kind of target those. And so that's, I think, a good idea. And of course, manually digging, if we dig down deep enough to get most of the root, the dandelions and things can be taken out manually by hand. We don't always need to depend on herbicides either. Oh, what about the hard to control weeds, like the creeping Charlie on the left hand and, of course, thistles on the right hand? Fall is really the best time to control those hard to kill weeds. And here's the reason for that. In the fall of the year, these perennial weeds know that they know that winter's coming because the days are getting shorter. And so they know that they need to start preparing themselves for winter so they can come back next spring to haunt us. So they start carrying things downward, carbohydrates and everything down into the root system to become nice and healthy. And if we apply herbicides at that time, so we're talking about usually during September sometime, those weeds will carry that herbicide down quite efficiently into their root system. So the kill will oftentimes be better at that time of year. Now, because they're hard to kill weeds, oftentimes one application isn't going to do it. But applying the herbicide in September and then again the following spring for any that do appear. See, these weeds spread so easily that if we don't kind of stay on them for maybe the course of a year, in the fall, then in the spring, maybe the fall again if you need to. Eventually, if we're persistent, we can out-persist these persistent weeds. Now, what about grassy weeds? And of course, a grassy weed is basically anything. Usually, they're kind of a wider blade that just doesn't mesh in well with our regular lawn grass. The two very common ones, and there's a third I'll get to in a minute, but two very common ones are crabgrass and quackgrass. Now, it's important to know kind of the difference and be able to recognize these two because the name crabgrass is oftentimes kind of mistakenly used for both. Okay, crabgrass, which you see here in the photo, is kind of that lighter, little bit yellowish green. Crabgrass is an annual grass, means that each spring it sprouts from seed that was deposited the previous growing season. So each year it has to sprout from seed, and that seed starts to sprout usually sometime in April, around mid-April, when the soil warms to about 50. Now, on the other hand, quack grass is a perennial grass, meaning it has a root system that comes back every year. All right. And to me, the easiest way to identify quack grass is to dig up part of it, and you see those pearly white rhizomes, the runners underneath. And if you see a grass kind of in early spring, if you see a grass greening up in early spring, kind of when the rest of your grass greens up, as kind of in the photo on the upper right there, it's probably quack grass. See, the crabgrass over on the left-hand side of the screen, crabgrass has to wait until the soil warms up, and then seed has to sprout, turn into a little seedling, and then it starts appearing. So if the grass, this weedy grass, is starting to annoy us early in the season, when the rest of the grass is greening up, we'll dig down and probably find those roots. Now, the reason it's important is the control is totally different. If we use crabgrass preventer on quackgrass, it won't do any good. So let's talk a little bit about these. Crabgrass control, there are a lot of products sold on the market. They're called crabgrass preventer, crabgrass control. What these are uh, they're germination preventers. They're products, granular products that when put down over the lawn area, they will kill the little germinating crabgrass seedlings. So it's important to get these on before the crabgrass starts to sprout. So usually that's around tax day, April 15th. It does depend on soil temperature. Around 50 degrees, it has to be put on. If the product is put on too early, it can lose its effect. And if it's put on too late, then the crabgrass has already germinated and it won't have effect. Another important thing is to read the instructions on the label because these products need moisture in order to be activated, which is usually a quarter to a half an inch either from a rain that's got to come fairly soon after application, or we need to sprinkle it if no with moisture if no rain is in the forecast. All right. Now next, quackgrass. So far, there is nothing that will, no products that will selectively kill quackgrass out of our established lawn. The products would also kill our good grass. So, boy, what do we do with quackgrass intermixed in the lawn? Well, glyphosate, the ingredient in original Roundup, is an option. We could smother patches. It'll also kill the good grass. And so quackgrass is a challenge, a much greater challenge than crabgrass. And I'm sure the people that develop chemicals and weed killers, I'm sure they're working on something that would selectively take quackgrass out of a lawn. But right now, there isn't anything to that. Okay, there is a third type of weedy grass, wide-bladed grass called tall fescue. So if you notice the clumps there, that is tall fescue. And it's so deeply rooted that it will oftentimes stay green when the rest of the lawn starts getting dormant from being too dry, because it's very deeply rooted and can stay green with its deep root system. Well, there are no selective products that will kill that without killing the good grass. We could dig the clumps. That's not overly difficult if the lawn isn't covered with those. We could just dig out those, then reseed a little patch of that. You could use glyphosate to kill that. It will kill the good grass also on it. So sometimes I wonder if a person's just as well to pop out those clumps, um, and that might be the easiest for tall fescue. So let's talk about raking. When to rake the grass in the spring of the year. And sometimes just to kind of get the matting out of the grass. I know right now our lawn is kind of all matted down. And just to kind of fluff it up and get some air down in is, I think, a good idea in the spring of the year. We should wait, though, until it dries up a bit. Kind of a good rule of thumb is if you can kneel on the lawn with your jeans, and if you don't get a big wet spot on your knee, then it's probably dry enough. If it's too moist, we risk ripping out the tender grass. Power raking in the spring should also wait until the lawn has firmed up and it's fine, even if it's actively growing, the power raking. How do we know if our lawn would benefit from power raking? It's also called dethatching. So if we, with a big heavy butcher knife, cut out a plug out of the soil profile. So the thatch is the area between the green grass blades and the soil. It's a kind of undecomposed tannish layer. Now, a little bit of thatch is good because that helps conserve moisture, block out weeds, keeps the lawn cooler. So the right amount of thatch is about a half an inch. If the thatch isn't decomposing and it's building up greater than half an inch, then maybe a power raking would benefit to get rid of some of that. Now, when you do power raking like that, you should then rake off the thatch that has been brought to the surface. And of course, all of these things are certainly a lot easier if you've got someone watching to make sure you're doing it right. Lawn care fun. All right. Another practice on that related to the dethatching or power raking is core aeration. And that's where the little plugs of soil are brought up out of the lawn profile. That helps get rid of the thatch. And it also opens up a compacted lawn so that water and nutrients can penetrate down in. And those little plugs that are brought up onto the surface, they are meant to stay on there. Rain and sprinkling will disintegrate those down in. So core aeration, you do leave the little cores up on the soil surface. Now, we mentioned mowing height. For the final October mowing, we can go down from about 3 inches and maybe over the course of a couple of mowings down to about an inch and a half. So in the fall of the year, as the lawn is starting to go dormant, reducing that height is a good idea. Oh, and I love this. There's no need to rake leaves in the lawn because it adds nutrition, it helps suppress weeds, conserves moisture, and it adds good organic material down in. There was a fascinating study done at Ohio State University over the course of a few years, and they tested whether an area of lawn actually benefits from having the leaves mulch down in. So this was our own mower making a pass over the leaves, grinding them up and sending them down in. Now, if maybe a couple of passes with the lawnmower will be needed, if it doesn't grind them up and send them down into the lawn profile, if they just stay on the top, they need to be removed because that would tend to smother the lawn and just get too moldy and packed over winter time. So oftentimes leaves on our lawn might kind of clump up in groupings. So maybe if we take a rake and just feather them out in a wider area on the lawn and then mulch them in. There are some good reasons for returning that product right down into our lawn. See, again, we're saving time. We're not having to rake, and we're using that resource of those fallen leaves down into the lawn profile. Now, sometimes it's a little hard to remember when we should be doing some of these things. University of Minnesota has a great lawn calendar. So if you simply do an online search, University of Minnesota Lawn Care Calendar, and of course works well for North Dakota and South Dakota too, it gives you this list. So if we kind of take a look at things such as, let's go on down to aerating. Okay, mid-August through October can be done, or core aerating, it also says. Another okay time to do it, late April through May. And dethatching, they're suggesting mid-August through September, and we could add May to that also. So anyway, kind of a useful chart for when to do some of these operations. Again, you can find that by searching University of Minnesota Lawn Care Calendar. Well, let's take a little look at maybe some lawn alternatives. You know, um, maybe people would like to try something different than the standard grass lawn. What are some different types of things we can do? Well, there are some low maintenance turf grasses that are being developed, and basically you don't mow them. They only reach a certain height, and that's all the taller they get, so you can just leave them unmowed. So that's one alternative, is to search for one of those types of grasses or ground covers, such as you see here. Those are beautiful ground covers. Now, most ground covers like that are not meant to have much traffic on. It would be difficult to walk across that without disrupting those plants. Or maybe we'd want to turn the front area into a wildflower type area. One thing I should mention though, weeds are a challenge in that. Weeds are a challenge in a lawn, and weeds are also a challenge in kind of a wildflower mix like that. The quackgrass and thistles are going to grow in that just like they do in a lawn. And so we do need to be prepared to do some weeding in those areas as well. What about creeping junipers? There's some very low growing junipers. Again, difficult to walk on, but if it's an area of the lawn, if you're trying to reduce the area of lawn in areas where there's no foot traffic, creeping junipers do quite a nice area. And of course, a person does need to be prepared because the weeds will pop up through that as well. Now I love this one. What about a clover lawn? I love clover in our own lawn, the white Dutch clover. Now, as you can see in the photo on the left-hand side, that clover stayed green even when the grass went brown and dormant from not enough moisture. And so clover is so deep-rooted. A person can even buy clover, kind of a micro clover, small-leaved clover, and make a whole clover lawn. Clover meshes well with an existing grass. You don't have to have all clover. A nice thing about clover is that it meshes well with the lawn, but also it'll produce those nice little blossoms below the 3-inch mowing height. And so that provides some things for our bees. And of course, if we're providing nutrition for our bees, they'll pollinate our apple trees and our cucumbers. Um, it used to be in the 40s and 50s, clover used to be recommended to be put in lawn grass mixes because clover, being a legume, can fix and produce nitrogen. So it helps to feed the soil. And so it plays very well with grass. And so it used to be considered an elite lawn if you had clover in the mix. And of course, we hear a lot about bee lawns. Bee lawns have a number of different things that, along with the lawn grass, some things that provide some flowers for the bees, such as clover and a number of other things as well. And if they bloom low enough, then we can still mow our lawn and have those things. So a little bit of a recap in that fall lawn care is a key to success. A fertilized Labor Day, continue to mow high. We don't need to rake off the leaves like they're doing. We can mulch those in. Another very important concept is to not let our lawns be the enemy of our trees. Look at that scar on that mowing scar. String trimmers are also very dangerous to those. And the life support tissue on a tree is right under that outer bark. And so if we nick that bark with our lawnmowers, that causes irreversible, excuse me, irreversible damage. So we need to be really, really careful. Instead, on young trees and around young evergreens, mulching. Mulching not only helps the young tree, keeps the grass away so that the tree roots get more moisture and nutrients, but also then we don't have to trim so close to those trees. The other thing that I want to mention is, of course, anytime we do opt to use lawn herbicides, we need to be very, very cautious because the definition of an herbicide is a product that kills plants. So it can kill weeds, but it can also harm what we'd consider good plants, like that tomato. So we have to be very, very cautious anytime we do use lawn herbicides around our other vegetation, such as vegetable gardens or trees and shrubs. Here's a tree that has been affected either by sprayed drift or that herbicide got down into the root system. Some products, such as dicamba, are well known to travel down into the root system and and then cause problems such as you see there, the curling of leaves. So anytime we do opt to use herbicides, we do need to follow the label directions extremely careful to make sure that we don't have any adverse reactions from our good plants. What about no mow May? You know, that's been a common question. No mow May. What about that? Well, you know, it's an interesting concept. It was a well-meaning project that first started in England, and then the concept was kind of catchy, and so it was tried in the United States. I suppose it's been probably a decade ago already. The idea was that if a person paused during the month of May, paused mowing, there would be materials that would bloom, and those flowers then would help our pollinators and our bees, which of course we need for our edible crops. We need those for our apples and we need those for our cucumbers to produce. And so that was the idea behind No Mow May. Uh, the problem that it caused, though, was that what what grows in no mow May, besides the grass getting really long, is most of our lawns, what grew were dandelions and maybe some assorted weeds like plantains. Um, you know, when many of us visualize no mow May and kind of letting things bloom for our bees, many of us envision kind of a wildflower meadow, but that's kind of not what's unleashed. That'd be awesome if it did, but usually what's unleashed are dandelions primarily. And entomologists and beekeepers indicate that dandelion pollen isn't the best source of nutrition for bees. And so, in the meantime, it becomes kind of a haven for rodents in town settings or out of town. And also, it's quite damaging to the lawn grass. Then to try to get that back down to a mowing height at the end of May. So it hasn't quite created the benefits that it was well-meaning set out to be. Instead, there are other things we can do to encourage our pollinators and actually give them some good nutrition. One is incorporating clover into the lawn. It gives the benefits, good nutrition to the bees and pollinators, but also we can keep our lawn mowed 3.5 inch, and it'll still blossom. But also, plant flowers, perennials, things in containers, annuals in containers. We can plant lots of flowers that give good nutrition to bees in our landscapes and flower beds. And so no mow May hasn't always created what it was intended to. But it's an interesting concept that's made for some really interesting discussion. So if we kind of summarize a little bit, lawn care with less inputs, mow 3 inches high, even slightly higher. Don't bag the grass clippings. Water a little less often and more deep. Fertilize once a year in September. And if you want to give a secondary, then in around Memorial Day. And spot spray weeds, especially in the fall of the year. That would be kind of a summary. And again, we're doing less work, less inputs on that. So again, the lawn is kind of the canvas on which we feature the rest of the landscape. And if we kind of care for a lawn, it can be a healthy resource without a lot of extra inputs. And so there's some good advantages to having a lawn and caring for it. And now I like to mention our podcast, the forum. John Lamb and I do a weekly podcast. You can search for it, Growing Together, a Gardening Podcast. And we enjoy producing that each week. And now I'm going to check the Q&A and the chat box for questions, and I'm going to leave my email address there for a bit. Always feel free to email me, donald.kinzler@ndsu.edu. And thanks for your patience when you do email me. Once in a while, especially during extremely busy times, I do get a little bit behind. All right, let's check the Q&A first. How to get rid of streaked gophers in the lawn. Uh, uh, Critters are a challenge, whether it's deer, rabbits, or gophers in the lawn. Critters are always a challenge. And gophers in the lawn, you've probably already tried trapping. You've probably tried maybe repellents. Um, Trapping and repellents. Those are probably the only things that I know of to try, and they're not 100%. They can be very tricky to try to trap, and also the repellents are kind of hit and miss if you check for some repellents that are for gophers. But that's about the best I can do. I don't know of any other way because those little striped gophers are tricky. All right, another question in regards to your Saturday forum question and answer about rabbit droppings as good fertilizer. I would like to ask, do you have any knowledge on deer and turkey droppings that are becoming more prevalent in our yard as far as the fertilizer effect on the grass? Thanks, Larry, for the question. Yeah, I had someone write into the forum garden column Q&A wondering about rabbit droppings. Are they good fertilizer? Is there anything we should do? Are they harmful at all? So I did a little extra research because I kind of knew what our own experience had been. My own experience is the rabbit droppings just seem to blend into the perennials and the shrubbery, and they never seem to cause any burning or harm. So anyway, when I did a little research, those that research manure indicated that rabbit droppings are actually 4 times as high in nutrients as cattle manure or horse manure, and twice as nutritious as chicken manure, poultry manure. The other thing that they emphasized was that rabbit droppings are considered cold manure versus the hot manure of others. Okay, so rabbit manure did not need to be composted. It does not burn things. It's a slow release. Okay, the hot manures, horse manure, cattle manure, deer manure, we'd put in with that, and the turkey would be like poultry manure. They needed to be composted first because they're considered hot. They can burn plants. It's more of a quick release until they're composted. And so anyway, the deer and the turkey droppings on your lawn, they could probably cause some burning. And so, rabbits are more friendly, I guess. Whereas the deer and turkey, you could get some localized burning with those. Uh, are night crawlers bad for lawns? Are night crawlers bad for lawns other than making it tough on the lawnmower? Anyone who's walked across a lawn affected by night crawlers It's like walking across golf balls. It makes it very bumpy. Night crawlers are actually beneficial to the lawn. They aerate it, and so night crawlers aren't bad for the lawn. But yeah, it's tough to mow because it's so bumpy. Several things we can do. There are no chemicals that are cleared for nightcrawler control. But one thing we can do is when we do water the lawn, water deeply. Night crawlers like moisture, and so if we water deeply, the night crawlers will tend to go deeper down into the soil. So anyway, frequent shallow sprinklings tend to keep the night crawlers closer to the surface. All right, Kevin asks, no grass wants to grow under my maple trees. They're trimmed upwards about 6 feet from the ground. No grass wants to grow under my maple trees. If it's a young maple, I'd maybe keep a circle of mulch about 5 feet diameter around a young maple. And if it's an older established maple that's casting too much shade, then try a mix, maybe overseeding with a mix high in fescue. So try a shade type mix high in fescue. Also, maple roots tend to be fairly shallow rooted. So some of that, it could be uh, taking the moisture away from the grass, making it a little harder for grass to grow. And so under maple tree, a person might need to concentrate a little more watering. But again, fescue, try that if you haven't. How do you know if you have too much grass clippings in your lawn? Again, with a butcher knife, cut out a soil profile, pop that out, and look for that undecomposed layer. Half an inch is perfect. Over half an inch, then you might consider raking or power raking. We know rainwater is probably the best. How about deep well water versus river water versus city water? Any data on those, Larry asks. Of course, yeah, rainwater is the best. Uh, River water is usually quite good. Of course, we don't always know the runoff on river water. City water, of course, has chemicals. For many people, and well water, of course, a test would probably be advisable. Larry, I don't have any real good data on those. Even city waters vary as to whether the city has chlorine in it or not. And of course, it has fluoride. And of course, river water kind of depends what the runoff has been. So I'm not going to have a real good answer for you, Larry, on well water versus river water versus city water. So I'm sorry I can't be a little more specific on that. Carla asked, lawn alternatives, won't they spread to the neighbors' yards? Some of those lawn alternatives would. Clover will tend to spread a little bit, so some of those lawn alternatives would spread. Um, Clover doesn't spread wildly, but it will. And so, yeah, a person does kind of need to keep in mind the neighbors too when a person of such as like the creeping juniper. If you had creeping juniper right up to your property line, that's going to keep spreading onto the neighbors too, meaning you'll have to once a year cut it back. Does lime help break up clay soil? Unfortunately, no. I wish there was something wonderful, a product to put on clay soil to make it more workable, because I struggle with our clay soil, but lime doesn't help break it up. Lime is quite alkaline, and our clay soil is already quite alkaline. And so the antidote for clay soil is organic material, compost, peat moss, coconut coir, products such as that, well-rotted manure. When do you start mowing a brand new lawn? Brand new lawn that has been seeded. Once that the grass has sprouted and grown and gets to a point where it looks like it's starting to bend over and it has filled in enough so that you're not going to leave tracks with the lawnmower, sinking in the dirt. And before it gets too floppy, then a person can go ahead. So I suppose you'd be looking at, again, over 3 inches and then mowing it down to the 3 inch level. Tips for growing grass under pine trees. Grass struggles under evergreen trees because evergreen trees are very shallow rooted. And so the evergreen trees with their shallow roots suck the moisture out of the soil and they suck the nutrients out. So if a person wanted to try to grow It's not an acid situation. Soil tests easily prove that. So if a person wants to grow grass, do a shade grass like fescue, and it's going to require extra fertilizer and keeping it more moist than you would. And that's why oftentimes under evergreen trees, you just see it bare or mulched. Mulch is a good alternative too. What about high traffic areas like the same dog path around the house? How can I keep that grass withstanding high traffic? There are some grass blends sold that indicate that it's for sports turf. You might have to do a little digging to find these, but for sports turf and high traffic areas, they're grass that tolerates a little higher traffic. In those areas too, where you have continuous traffic, it gets compacted. So core aeration that pulls up a little plug of soil can help on that. So two things on the traffic, it compresses the soil, and then also it just physically wears off that grass. And some grasses are a little more tolerant of that. So check for higher grass and make sure you're aerating. Um, in late summer, I get a thin-bladed grass that stands above the existing grass, easily pulled out, but very annoying. Any idea on what that grass is? Not sure from the question what it would be, but if it pulls out easily by the root, it is probably an annual type grass that's coming up from seed that was dropped the previous. So I would use a crabgrass type preventer. The label on crabgrass preventers indicates that it does prevent other type of annual grasses from sprouting also. So I would try a crabgrass preventer on that, even though you don't actually have crabgrass. Check the label, it helps others too. What do you think about the Jerry Baker mixtures that he places on the lawn? Larry, I'm not sure. I'll do some checking on the Jerry Baker mixes. I'm not familiar with that brand of mixtures. I'll do a little checking for you. I'll look up your email, and so I'll have to do a little investigating on the mixes that he places on the lawn. I wonder, is that a grass seed mix or kind of a nutrient mix? I'm not sure. I'll try to do a little more looking on that. Okay, let's see. Next, we need to check the chat. Okay, we're almost done. Thank you for those of you who are hanging in. Is it better to power rake or aerate? That's a good question. Okay, power raking, dethatching brings up all the fluff. The core aeration brings up a little plug of soil along with that thatch. So if you dig out a little chunk of this turf profile and find that it's mostly just a matter of having too much fluff in it, then power raking can help alleviate that. If you feel like your lawn is too compacted from either traffic or heavy clay soil, then core aeration that brings up a plug of soil. If I was going to do one operation and you aren't sure which to do, maybe the core aeration would be the way to go. Um, how often do lawns need core aeration or dethatching? I've actually never done either of those on our own lawns. I kind of let them nature kind of decompose them. But there are some areas of high traffic in our area that I probably should do some core aeration. So if I had kind of a question, and especially if it's compacted soil, I'd probably opt for the core aeration on that. But if you don't think it's overly packed hard, then um, power raking would get rid of the excess fluff. I think we worked our way to the end of the questions. Well, thank you very much for tuning in. And this ends, as of right now anyway, this ends our weekly spring webinar series. I might possibly do another one or two in April or May, but everyone who registered for this is on the list that I would send any future webinars that are going to happen. There are so many good topics. We could do shade gardening. We could talk some more tips about perennials. And so if time allows, and if I do any more, you guys will be the first to know, everyone that registered for this. Again, thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate your attendance very much. Thank you.